segment where we now welcome Ben Milam, Multimedia Journalist, SuperTalk Mississippi News.
What's going on, Gerard? Happy Friday, man.
What's up, Ben? Man, thanks for coming on in. You guys have been busy this week.
Oh, yes.
The legislature's been hopping around doing stuff. Mm-hmm. And, of course, top of that list is the news that the Mississippi House of Representatives accepted the Senate's amendment to their original legislation, which essentially gutted the House terminology and the House language, the House provisions to reform taxes in Mississippi, inserted their own. Mm-hmm. And the House concurred at warp speed. And I said, wait a second.
Yeah.
Something ain't right with that. And then subsequently we learned, what's going on?
A little oopsie-daisy.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and yesterday I think everyone was expecting this to go to conference next weekend and for this to be a really drawn-out thing. Of course, this is my first legislative session as a journalist, but that's just what I was told by everyone. You know, any kind of bill or just any sort of piece of policy or legislation that the two chambers go back and forth on and sort of trade amendments and barbs publicly, it's almost always going to go down to the wire, which we were just honestly confused as to why in the world did the House just flew through the House about a week plus early. And so as everyone has talked about and as you've discussed, and I'm sure we'll continue to as we kind of continue to unfold this, it really came down to there were multiple typos, but the big one was on this trigger provision that the Senate put into this House bill that was, I would say, probably the cornerstone of this amended version of basically letting economic growth or lack thereof drive and inform how fast you eliminate the income tax. It would put Mississippi on the path for the cutting of the state income tax. It just depends on how quickly or how slowly based on the economic growth. And that number was supposed to say, and this is how it was discussed on the floor, was that revenue growth overspending must reach 85% for a further drop of the income tax, a 0.25% drop annually after 2030.
Well, I'll say 85% of what a 1 percentage point to the tax rate cut would equal. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes. Instead, we had a decimal point in there that was not supposed to be in there, and so the bill reads 0.85%. So 85 1/100ths of what it was supposed to be, basically rendering the trigger provision useless.
Yeah.
Basically, you have to have basically marginal growth, if you can even qualify it as that, when it comes to state government, to trigger the incremental dropping of the income tax. And so you're going to hurdle towards the cutting of the income tax, basically what was already proposed in HB 1, pretty close to it. And the House, there was a motion to reconsider, I think, just because of, you feel like you kind of have
deference.
to, right? Yeah, deference and out of maybe a little bit of respect. But then that was tabled today, and they're sending it on to the governor. Governor Tate Reeves came out, a public statement on social media, basically said, I'm going to sign this thing.
Yeah.
And so this is a really, a lot of people I think are understandably frustrated by this, but I think it's interesting to me how this was handled, because I don't know that you can really blame the House for passing this on. And I also think it's an unfortunate consequence of, because I think in some ways it feels like the House is taking advantage of a mistake. That's what some people have said, right? But again, I don't think you can blame them. And it's also, I think, a result of how this has been handled on a public stage almost. There have been some barbs traded by the two sides, right? And, I think that has resulted in them saying, well, I'm not sure that we have to handle this with a lot of, candor or patience or caution because of how we got to this point. I think maybe if it were handled differently throughout this process, maybe the two sides would have come together. They would have pushed it to conference and reconsidered the passage of this bill and let them fix this error. But that's not the case. It's on to the governor's desk, and we fully expect it to be signed by Tate Reeves, as he has said that he would publicly. Now, of course, they can go back and fix this, remedy this typo, but you would have to have both chambers agree on that in the future. So this is certainly not over. But in terms of this tax reform bill going to the governor's desk, that part is over.
Yeah. It looks like it's going to be signed into law, and I think I think it's absolutely fair to say, based on what is going to be enacted, that the income tax is going to be phased out without necessitating any sort of economic goals that have to be achieved, which is what the original intent of the Senate bill was. So essentially, here's the way I'd put it. The House got their way in that there's going to be an elimination of the income tax over the period of time without any sort of triggers or requirements. Mm-hmm. The Senate kind of got their way in that they were always dead set opposed to increasing the general sales tax.
Yes.
Right? So, and the Senate also got their way in that they created a new tier for PERS,
fifth tier for PERS,
which was a separate measure that got incorporated in this bill that I think, had they gone to conference, could have been raised as a potential point of order that could have derailed the whole thing. But I think the House said, wait a second, looks like a little error here. Let's move forward with this deal. Yeah. So here we go.
Yeah, and you do wonder what the House would have done with this if that error was not in there. But that is a great point, that it's still somewhere in the middle, right? Even with this error.
Yeah, both sides got some of what they want.
Exactly. The House just gets, if it continues this way and if it's not amended down the line at some point, they get full elimination of the income tax a little quicker than they may have if it did go to conference and if they had to make more of a compromise.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, this is eliminating the income tax without any triggers.
Yes, exactly.
Is what it boils down to.
Well, let me ask you this, Gerard, because your middle name is Tax.
Oh, thanks.
Do you think they go back to this next session or the 2 sessions from now and fix this typo, so to speak?
Well, not if the House has their way. I mean, presuming that the same leadership's in place, I don't know that it'll come up next. Well, it'll come up next session. Yes. I don't know that there will be any action on it. Where this is going to matter is when we get into 2030.
Yes.
The session of 2030 is when this is going to matter, because that's when this calculation will be considered.
Right.
And if we're in a situation where, just hypothetically, that we don't have revenues exceeding expenses, but yet we're cutting revenues through the income tax cut by more, that could necessitate the state borrow money. That could put us in quite the conundrum, unless the legislature acted and say, hey, look, guys, we know we signed this deal into law to continue to cut the income tax rate, but we got a problem here from a fiscal financial perspective that we need to address.
Which is why, the both sides have said we can always revisit this.
Well, sure.
Right?
Yeah. Sure. And honestly, Ben, that's consistent with the messaging from House leadership. Speaker of the House Jason White, Trey Lamar, House Ways and Means. When I asked that question, what happens if we get to a point where we're still chopping the income tax because it's on autopilot, there's nothing to stop it legislatively, statutorily, but yet we honestly can't afford it. They basically said, well, we would expect the legislature to act in a responsible manner at that point and take some sort of action.
Which is, they were just going about it maybe on different ends of it, right? Senate was doing it on the front end.
The Senate was codifying that action.
Yes, and the House was saying, if we need to, we can go back and reassess this.
You got to hang around. We got a break. We got more to talk about, and we'll discuss the tax situation a little bit more. I'm not sure how much in our audience knew about this drafting error, and it is an error. There's no doubt about it, and the Senate knows it, and they Well, I won't say what they feel about it, but they're still concerned about this tax elimination being on autopilot and there being nothing to stop it other than legislative action, if necessary. I hope it's not necessary. We're coming right back with Ben Studio, Ben Milam, Multimedia Journalist, SuperTalk Mississippi News. Just continuing discussion about this shocking development, honestly, Ben, that because not only did we see significant differences in the approach to addressing taxes. I'm not going to say eliminating because the Senate initially drafted a bill that would have terminated at 2.99%. Now we have, and then we got an amendment to the bill where it phases it out with achievement of certain triggers, and the House stuck their language in the Senate bill, and the Senate stuck their language in the House bill, and you thought, okay, nothing's going to happen. And then yesterday, when our news director, J.T. Mitchell, sent me a text, I was up in Tupelo, real briefly just said, real short and sweet, said, it looks like the House is concurring with the Senate bill, which was the House bill struck and replaced with Senate language. And I'm thinking, wait a second, something doesn't sound right. Now we find out there's a drafting error.
Yeah. Well, again, the word on the street, so to speak, was that before yesterday was that we just kind of felt like it was going to die, that nothing was going to get done in the regular session, and then it just kind of popped up out of nowhere. But because we didn't, or at least I have not mentioned it, the base, or kind of the big points of what was passed by the House. It does cut the grocery tax from 7% to 5%. That was one of the big priorities for Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann and the Senate leadership. The income tax, this is, you can go look on supertalk.fm on the article that Caleb Saylors did on this. It shows the graphic that the Senate had in their press conference of basically the big things they wanted to get.
A storyboard.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, income tax 4% to 0% with gradual elimination with triggers, right? And that's the part where the typo messes that up. Probably, basically are no triggers, right? And then you get the 3-cent increase on the excise tax on gas. 3 cents per for 3 years, moving it up to a total of 9 cents on the excise tax. That will go to roads and bridges. That was one of the big things that they wanted to fund directly, recurring revenue stream, and then the fifth tier for PERS. And so you look at that, the storyboard, as you put it, it kind of hit on just about everything aside from the trigger. So it's just maybe a less measured approach than the Senate wanted, but they do get most of what they wanted, and of course the House gets quick elimination of the income tax.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels like you landed somewhere close-ish to where you would have landed if they did bang something out in conference weekend.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
That's true. And so let's remind again that there is an increase in excise taxes on fuel.
Yes.
Of 3 cents per gallon that will be phased in over 3 years to a total of 9 cents per gallon.
Yeah, over the next 3 years.
Your gas would, at least the taxes you pay as part of your price per gallon of gas is going to go up from 18.4 cents to 27.4 cents. And I believe that begins to kick in fiscal year 26?
Correct.
26.
26.
Is that right?
Yes. So, 26 to 29 is that span of increase.
Okay.
But then no sales tax increase. That's the other big. In fact, that's
no
kind of the headline.
Sales tax.
General sales tax increase on that Senate board that they had at their press conference. So, more or less, I think both sides got some semblance of what they wanted.
Yeah, and something we need to point out and be, again, totally fair and objective about this is the increase in the general sales tax of 1.5% that was included in the original House bill, HB 1, in exchange for that 1.5%, which would stay with the city or county in which the transaction occurred, there would be a clawback and an ending of the current diversion of the 7% full sales tax that we currently pay. 18.5% of that gets diverted to the cities and counties. And what this means is that the revenue from sales taxes to the state will remain relatively constant.
Yeah.
Except there will be a reduction in sales taxes the state receives on groceries somewhat, because we're taking that down from 7 to 5, and the state is going to cover the reduction of the diversion to the cities. So it's going to take that into account as well. So there just some of the nuances there, but excise taxes on fuel going up in the state of Mississippi once the governor signs this law.
That's right, 9 cents, as you mentioned, 9 cents per gallon, with a 3-cent increase every year beginning of fiscal year 26. And so, another one of the bullet points on this, the big Senate general plan is to keep cities whole. And this, the excise tax on fuel, would work to annually keep MDOT whole, right?
Yeah,
to fund
give them more money for roads and bridges and to pull down more federal money. That was the purpose of this.
Exactly.
Yeah. But the reduction of the grocery sales tax goes into effect here in a few months, July 1, 2025. That's right. 7.25% is where we're going.
It was interesting to hear, all the way back at the Neshoba County Fair. That was one of the big questions was, to the lieutenant governor and to the governor, what's the priority here? Is it income tax or grocery tax? For Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, it was grocery tax. And so he gets that immediate decrease of 2%, and the governor gets at least to get on track for full elimination of the income tax. And so, it felt like, and we were for a lot of the session at an impasse for those two priorities. But again, as you dig into the nuance of it, you covered some of it there. Both sides have largely gotten what they wanted.
Yeah.
And you would expect at some point, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, especially in that 2030 session, as you mentioned, after we can really analyze the effect both on a local and state level in terms of tax revenue and effect on the residents as well, you are probably going to have some reassessment of those effects, and if it needs to be tweaked in that 2030 session, it might be tweaked either way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that I know that it often gets referred to, talking about the trigger calculations, as having attained economic growth. Sorta. It really requires that our revenues continue to increase, and our spending. And it outpaces our spending to a level that the Senate at least felt comfortable chopping away at the income tax rate.
Yeah.
But something that folks need to keep in mind, a couple of things, points I want to make, is that based on this, there are no triggers. I mean, essentially, there are no. We will achieve this every year after the initial reduction to 3%, which occurs over 4 years. So starting in tax year 31, we'll start reducing the income tax by 0.3% a year.
Yeah.
So what will happen is we'll have no income tax if no changes are made and this bill becomes law in this state in 2040.
Yeah.
That's the way all that will work. So that seems like a long time, but
and that would be from 3%, because you go from 4 to 3
to nothing.
Yes.
Because the reason I say that, Ben, is because if you look at the language, even with the drafting error, the maximum amount you can reduce the income tax rate is 0.3%. You follow me?
Yes, yeah.
Thus, it would take 10 years to eliminate the 3% bracket. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because we're going to hit the maximum. Yes. Originally, the triggers were 85%, 100%, 115%. We're going to hit the 115% every single year.
Easily.
Right. And that means we will reduce the rate by 0.3%. You see that in the language there?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it'll be really interesting to see how they handle that moving forward. Again, I think there is a benefit to it of both sides getting pieces of what they want, because again, I think there is going to be a natural reassessment of the effects of this, and you'll have data to analyze. Of course, we have that after the 2022 tax cuts, right, which really started this kind of big cascade of tax cuts and moving towards income tax elimination specifically. And so you would certainly expect that conversation to continue over the next couple of years and for it to ramp up again in earnest in 2030.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
It should be interesting. And the other thing that folks need to keep in mind is, as we continue to reduce the income tax and then ultimately phase it out, we'll really only have one major source of revenue in the state, and that's sales taxes. So unless you guys go out there as a result of these changes and spend a whole bunch more money, or we attract a whole bunch of people into the state, new people that are spending money, and or cut spending, we're going to run into a budgetary problem potentially.
Yeah, and you won't really see the big effects from those things, the latter things you mentioned, until 20, 30 years down the line.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, I know we spent all our time talking about
That's
that,
all right.
but I think that's kind of the main thing going on.
I think you're right.
Appreciate it,
Yeah.
Ben. Thanks for
Roy.
coming in.
Yes, sir.
Coming right back, folks. Stay with us.